What's up, YouTube? In today's video, we're going to be looking at Puppeteer. What is Puppeteer? Puppeteer is a browser automation tool, very similar to Selenium. It's almost like the new Selenium, if you will. It is developed by, it's open source and developed by the Chromium DevTools engineers primarily, but with this open source, anyone can be contributing to that. And the reason that the Chromium DevTools people are working on Puppeteer is because it's essentially using the same protocol, the DevTools Protocol, to communicate with Chromium, the browser backend. There is another project called Playwright, which is the Microsoft version of this whole thing. So if you want to work with IE browsers, then Playwright is the equivalent to Puppeteer. And Puppeteer recently also announced that they are trying to support Firefox. So they're working with Mozilla to support this whole thing with Firefox. Puppeteer, if you don't understand what a browser automation tool is essentially a means to simulate a user sitting on a browser, like, clicking things, making selections, and moving forward, navigating back, forward, stuff like that. Typically used for automation, for testing automation, from a UI testing perspective. Simulating a user primarily. So anything a user can do on a browser, you can do through Puppeteer, and probably a whole lot more, because essentially it has the capability of the DevTools API. So you can also look at things like networking and performance and load times and requests and response, and you can execute JavaScript. This is just a whole lot. Puppeteer essentially is a Node.js API or a JavaScript API. You use it typically with Node.js. You have PuppeteerSharp, which is the C# NuGet package. They're almost on par. The beauty is that if you are stuck somewhere and you find Node.js help, you can easily translate that to C#. If you're not averse to using Node.js or you haven't played with Node.js yet, I highly recommend starting to work with Node.js. It's definitely a skill that will be nice to have and certainly will widen your horizons, so to speak. You can use Node.js from Visual Studio directly. They have projects, Node.js projects. You can also use Visual Studio Code. I prefer to use Visual Studio itself since I'm more familiar with Visual Studio and I don't have to learn different keyboard shortcuts and different ways to work with things. I love the colors that the Visual Studio Code has, but in terms of productivity, I prefer using Visual Studio just because I'm more familiar with that. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at PuppeteerSharp, which is the C# equivalent. The aim is not to give you a full-on kind of tutorial on Puppeteer. I want to introduce Puppeteer to you, but I also want to introduce certain things that you should be aware of when you're building or working with Puppeteer. Certain things I've learned over the years. Puppeteer was introduced just like 3 years ago, like 2017. I may be wrong, but it's not like that old, but it's just fairly recent in that sense. So there are some things that, gotchas or things you should know as you move down this path that I want to introduce you to. You will, if you want to be good at Puppeteer, you will need to understand Css Selectors, XPath, anything that a front-end developer would know, you would need to know to be a good Puppeteer developer, if that's what there's such a thing. And typically because you're using Puppeteer to automate your UI testing, I think that sort of makes sense. If you build the UI, you will not automate it. But essentially, that's a skill set you would need to have. You also need to know how to work with the Chrome and other dev tools from the browser. In case you're stuck, you're trying to find some things, you need to know how to use that. So we'll go into some of that today, but it won't be like a deep dive into these things. This is mainly a getting started kind of tutorial with a little bit of insight into some of my experiences and some of the things I've done and discovered over a period of time. I recently started playing with Puppeteer again at work, and so it sort of revived a new kind of kindling to wanting to share this with you. I played with it a couple of years in the past. Didn't do a whole lot of stuff with it, but now I've got to dig back into it, and so I've been spending some time with it. I thought, what better than to share this, my new insight into Puppeteer with you guys. All right, so let's get started. So it's a PuppeteerSharp NuGet package. That's all you need, right? You can start a .NET Core application, console application like I have done here. And all I've done is downloaded the NuGet, PuppeteerSharp, And make sure you download PuppeteerSharp. There's many Puppeteer other things. So just make sure you're downloading PuppeteerSharp. I can show you the that's the package. PuppeteerSharp, and it's currently version 2.04. They keep it up to date. It's not something that they is lagging. Luckily, so when I saw that the folks on that started this project have been keeping this up to date, I said, well, let me try this now. I actually have been spending most of my Puppeteer stuff with Node.js, and at the time I think the library was not there, or it wasn't quite up to par. And I love Node.js. I love TypeScript. In fact, I think when I'm doing TypeScript, I can't sometimes tell the difference between TypeScript and C# because you got the async await and a whole bunch of things like that. So it feels fairly at home. All right. So what have I got? I got a program that I developed a HTML page that looks like this, and we want to be able to fill out this page. It's got a bunch of things. Now, this is a simple page in that the HTML is clean. The cleaner your HTML, the simpler it becomes to test it. If you have to dig through, div tags and span tags and all kinds of other things just to get to the control that you're trying to automate, it can be difficult. I've done some work where the pages I'm trying to automate are fairly complicated. And I think that's probably the norm for normal websites. There's lots of images embedded, and you're not sure you should be clicking on the button. Where the heck is the radio button? There's no actual radio button. It looks like a radio button. I'm hoping you understand what I'm saying. This is a simple HTML page in that the HTML is clean. Right? There are fairly complicated HTML pages where the HTML might look the same, but except that behind the scenes, it's a very cluttered HTML. So the more cluttered the HTML is, the harder it might be to automate that page. So be aware of that. But today's video, I want to show you, even though it's a simple page, it's got text boxes, it's got check boxes, it's got radio buttons, it's got drop downs and clicks and hyperlinks. So I want to show you some of those things so that this page has the gamut of the different kinds of things you would need to do, and some of the gotchas or caveats that you might need to be aware of. All right. All right. So the first thing you do is you create an instance or download the browser. Now, there is a way to show it where to go look for that executable, the Chromium executable. This is going to download. So the very first time it'll download that Chromium executable. So it'll take a while. It's quite a large download. If you're doing these as deployments, then maybe you want to think about packaging that as part of a deployment. And then in your C# code, just pointing to that executable rather than downloading it like this. All right. But once it's downloaded, it just doesn't bother re-downloading the Chromium over and over. If it finds it there, it'll just basically pick it up. So the question is where is it looking? And maybe if you're deploying things slightly, different locations, you need to provide the path for that. Hopefully that makes sense. So now we basically launch Puppeteer, and most of it is async. So be aware of that. Never ever forget the await, and this method also needs to be marked with the async modifier. And pretty much every method in PuppeteerSharp is asynchronous. Right. By default, it's headless. Headless just means you never see it, but I'm making it false. So headless is false, meaning it's going to show the head. And the reason is because I want to show a demo. But in real world, you probably don't, once you finish the development, you don't do the thing visible with nobody there to see it. Now, I don't know what your use case is, right? But typically when you're running tests and things, it's automated and you don't want to have to see the UI until you're, especially on a build service, who's watching, right? But I've turned the headless off, which means it's going to show the browser. I'm using this delay here. You'll see it multiple places. That's intentional. I want to kind of slow down the typing so that you can see it. Otherwise, it just zips by pretty quick and you can't see much. One of the things that Puppeteer does, it allows you to simulate an actual user. So you're not filling out the value of the text box. You are typing it in. So it's getting the mouse down and mouse up events, because today's modern websites rely a lot on events, and a lot of action or activity occurs as you're typing. So there are many websites that, if you don't hit the tab key or don't sort of focus out and focus into fields, they don't function correctly, there's something that goes missing in their behavior because they're expecting an actual user to be sitting there on the screen. So when you're automating with Puppeteer, you want to be sure that you're following a similar idea where you're focusing on the box, then you're typing, like key by key into the box, then you're focusing out or tabbing to the next field and so on. So I've just gotten in the habit of doing that for all my forms, just because that way it's not like you have to use different techniques for different forms. I mean, speed is not that big a deal in the sense that Puppeteer is pretty fast and like it's a UI. It's not like you expect this to run in like 1-2 milliseconds. So I would recommend that you follow the same trend. You focus or tab out of fields, you focus into the fields, then start the typing and so on. That'll give you the closest experience to a human being actually writing or sitting on the page and typing out, which means if you've got weird, events that you're listening to react, to make the page react to certain things and stuff like that, it's best to follow that practice. But you don't have, depending on your page, right? So I've just slowed this down so you can see the page moving. So if you look at this page here, I'm going to start filling out these fields and you're going to see that. I'll show you the HTML behind this stuff as well. So the field name for the first name is first name. You can see that in the HTML here. So it's the name field that is first name, but ID also is first name. So what I'm using over here is the ID. So this is the CSS Selector, the hashtag or the pound sign in case this is an ID, right? So you have to know, as I said, you have to know CSS Selectors. This is the simple part. Their CSS Selectors can get fairly complicated if your page is fairly complicated. So the more or better you understand CSS Selectors, the better off you're going to be in able to develop the automation for your web pages. Typically in the first page, because you're loading up the page, depending on the page, you can't just say browse there and start typing in, because that field may not be there, right? So you have to wait for that field to be available in the browser. And so that's what I'm doing over here. I'm essentially waiting for the same selector, right? And this typically has to just be done the first time when you go to a page. So after you've gone to a certain page, you probably want to wait for a selector that should exist before you start. I mean, think of it as from a human perspective, right? The human being can't start typing. It doesn't know where to go typing. So unless the human sees it, the human's not going to start typing. So when you're running a program like this, you need to kind of slow it down, right? You can't go at full speed because the page doesn't load in full speed. Depending on network traffic, network time of day, bandwidth, stuff like that, things can be faster and slower. So you can't use times, even though you can wait for specific amounts of time. I've had a case where I had to slow things down by a specific amount of time. You know how you get those date fields, text fields that have a mask, like for, let's say, date of birth. And because it's got a mask, if you typed too fast, the mask wouldn't work and then it would mix up the data. So I had to slow it down a little bit. I think I used like 100 milliseconds and then that worked fine. So what I'm getting at is try and simulate a human as much as possible, because most web pages are built for a human. So when you click on something and then you're expected to see a reload of the page, then it's going to take a while. Then the other thing you want to be concerned about, I'll show you some examples of that. There's a difference between clicking on a hyperlink, let's say, that's going to navigate you to a whole other page, versus a click that doesn't go to a whole other page. It simply kind of changes the DOM, inline. It's like a single page application or something similar. And I'll show you some examples of that. There's a difference between these two. And so in the one case, you can wait for navigation to occur, meaning complete, because it's truly a navigation, it's actually going somewhere. In the other case, even though it may look like a navigation, it's not. So you need to understand the differences, because if you say wait for navigation, then navigation will never occur. So the page, your Puppeteer code will just hang waiting for the navigation when there isn't any to occur. And so there's a difference. They both look like a hyperlink, but how they implemented will determine how you automate your browser. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to show you today, is just all the nuances and differences. So rather than give you a whole lesson on CSS selectors and JavaScript and Node.js and all that, that's what my point is here. So all text fields will be the same, especially if you can use the IDs for all the text fields, which is a good idea. Either use the ID or use the name. The name CSS will be slightly different here. And if I look at this method, this is my helper method, just because it's 2 more lines somewhere. So I'm going to show you the helper. So what I'm doing, I don't need to. You basically just need to do that. That's the one thing. Sorry, you need to do that. But I do a focus to that selector. So I'm using the same field selector to focus. I'm saying focus to the selector, then type to the selector, and then tab out of it. Very much simulating a user. And I'm using that same delay that we set up there for 100 milliseconds. And this I don't do in production code, but as I'm developing, certainly I'd like to see how it's working, just in case I'm having trouble. Right? Because very often because the pages are so complicated, like the mask, the date mask field, I could only tell the difference when I slowed it down just a little bit. If I slowed it down too much, I wouldn't see the problem. I couldn't understand, like when I take the delays, what's going on. So as I brought it down, slowed down enough where I could see what was going on, and literally just paused so I could see the data. And I found the data, if I go too fast, is incorrect, even though I'm typing the same data, because the mask is not reacting fast enough. The data ends up going completely weird. All right, so I got this helper method that I call, type field value. And basically what it does is focuses with the field first, then types, and then tabs out, just like a normal human being would. So all of my data, my text field entries are like that. So this is just a bunch of text, nothing different here. So these are all sort of the same. Then when we do a drop down, in this case, I've got the country again. This is the ID, and that is the value I'm trying to pick. So I'm going to show you the HTML here. Okay, here it is. So you see how the name of the country is here, but its value is this ISO value. So I'm trying to pick the United States, and so it'll be at the bottom here. And so I want to pick United States, and I got its ISO value. So I'm looking for the item by the value, and that's what I'm doing here. So it's ISO 3166-2:US. And so I've got another helper method, and dropdowns are fairly complicated, as in this out of the box. They don't have, well, they do have a feature, but it doesn't work all the time. So there's a .select async, like click async. There's a select async. And so rather than have something that works sometimes and doesn't work sometimes, I have my helper method. I just use it all the time, and it works all the time, no matter how the HTML itself is configured. This thing just works. At least so far, I've not had issues with it. Your mileage may vary, but certainly I'd rather use that, something that works all the time, than something that works sometimes and I have to keep changing things depending on what page I'm working with, or sometimes what drop down within the page I'm working on. This code will be available on my GitHub. There'll be a link in the show notes below. So if you need to look at that code to see what I've done, please take a look at it there. All right, so we have these 2 drop downs. Let me just show you the reference to the page here. So the country and the state, and of course I'm I'm picking United States only because I've got the states for United States here. So it's not like I have this set of states in my HTML for every possible country. So, but I'm going to pick from this possible set of values here. The states, as you can see, are all US states. So I have to first pick that, then fill up the zip code. Then check these 2 checkboxes, one or the other. Change the payment to PayPal. I'm not going to fill up these things. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to click on, Then it's going to click on this link, which is the link to my browser. Right? I'm going to click here myself so you can see what it's going to do. My browser, I'm saying my blog. It is my browser, but it's also my blog. Now on this blog, I'm going to scroll here. There's these links to different pages here. So when I click on like 2, it's now it looked like it refreshed the page. So there's a difference here, and I'll probably just zoom out a little bit so you can see the full page. Okay, so you see it's not refreshing the whole page. So this is not like a navigation. This is simply refreshing JavaScript, using JavaScript refreshing the kind of DOM here. So this style of navigating, if you will. It's not a navigation from a Puppeteer standpoint. So if you want to click on a page here and then click on something there, what if right now it's refreshing pretty quick, but what if it takes a while? You have to know to wait for that selector, whatever else you're looking for next, right? It's different from wait for navigation. That's what I'm trying to get at. If I click here on these hyperlinks here, for example, this is not the same thing. This is going to refresh the page. Well, just go there like that. See? It's a whole nother page. It's happening very quick, but this is a whole nother page. I don't know if you know that this is my blog that I've written with my own blog engine in .NET, old .NET. And it was the fastest website on the planet at that time. So this is, I'm talking about like 2010, 2011 timeframe. I don't know what your experience is going to be when you go to this blog. Let me know what you think or your performance as compared to other websites you've been on. The URL is www.matlus.com. Check it out. But whatever country you're from, if you do put a comment, please say you're from so-and-so country if you don't mind, and your experience as compared to other websites that are potentially from the US. I know maybe locally in your own country, things might be faster. So compare them with other websites, well-known websites that have similar amount of content, not like google.com, which has got like a text box. There's a whole lot of information here. And all this information is coming from a database. So every time you go to a separate page, it's re-querying the database for all this information. Even though it didn't look like it refreshed this part, it has actually refreshed all of this part here. It just doesn't appear like it's doing anything. Right? So it's a brand new refresh. Anyway, going back to this whole thing, these links are actual hyperlinks. They're navigating to another page, whereas these links are not navigating anywhere. Specifically, they're just refreshing the DOM here, rewriting the DOM here. So this is different in Puppeteer. You have to know what that's happening in the page to do that. All right. So once it comes to this home page, it clicks on page number 2. And once it clicks on page number 2, notice the top one here. So essentially, when I click on page number 2, it sort of waits for this element to be available and then clicks on this link here and then goes here. So basically, it stops at this point, right? So the whole automation that we're looking at is filling out that form, doing the checkboxes, check the radio buttons, changing the option for the radio button that's been selected, picking the drop-down options, clicking on a link that's a hyperlink that navigates to my blog, then clicking on this page number 2, which is not a hyperlink in that sense. It's not going to navigate to. Therefore, you don't want to wait for navigation, but you want to wait for an element to appear on the page. When I click here, it's going to then wait for this to appear. And once that appears, once I click here, it'll click on this, and it's clicking by name, as in, the title, in this case, what are you going to call this? The text that you see here. All right, so we see all the code now. All right, so set the drop-down value. Let's look at that custom thing here. So this is where you need to know XPath. So essentially, I'm looking for a field that has the ID attribute to be the ID that you're looking for. And it's a little more complicated than that. We're also looking for the option whose text value is equal to the value that we sent. Right? So it's going to find that it could be multiple, could be it returns an array, so there could be multiple matches. How you deal with the match was not found or too many matches were found is going to be totally up to you. In my case, I'm basically saying that if it's the length is greater than 0, then it's going to do something, and if not, it's going to select that. Yeah, I thought I was throwing an exception here. Oh, that's being done there. Yeah, so I should really be throwing an exception here, but maybe I'd modify this here. But in my case, I'm going to throw it. In your case, you might want to be nice about it, but in my case, that's a problem if I don't find the link. So anyways, it's an array, so you need to be aware of that. Once you have that element, you get a JS handle. From the JS handle, you can get the JSON value. That's the chosen value. That's sort of the value from the thing and from the drop-down, the option. And then you can select that. So the select by itself doesn't seem to work unless you use the other argument. So how to get that argument is where I got to go through that and go through the XPath. So And this is very generic for any option that is a true HTML select, tag with the option items. If you're using some other fancy form of a dropdown, this won't work. But yeah. And after everything, tab out of that as well. So this tab in, focus in, this is very standard in my thing. As I said, I'm trying to simulate a user to the extent possible. That way the rest of the website behaves consistently, and then there's no nuances. There have been cases where I thought I had to click on a button because it looks like a button. It says continue, but it's not a button. And I found that as soon as I tabbed from that last field, thought I was going, when I was doing the keyboard, I'm in the habit of using my tab key, like just go tab, 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 moving through all the fields. So when I hit the tab field, I thought it was sort of clicking the button. So in my Puppeteer code, I was trying to click the button, but it wasn't working. Then I found out that it's just a matter of tabbing out of the field. It wasn't like I had to click the button. And so from that point forward, I said, you know what, the best thing is to simulate a user sitting on the keyboard, typing tab, focus tab, drop down, all of that. And that actually worked. In fact, in some cases, I don't know if you guys know this, if you're if you're on a radio button or a checkbox, focused on the checkbox, you can hit the space key to check. I would actually do that and it would actually check the checkbox, right? So I'm not recommending you do that all the time, but it actually works that way. So when I'm using my keyboard only, that's how I fill out forms. I don't actually use the mouse. All right, so that's the custom set drop-down value field and method. And then back here, so then here we have checkbox. So this is click, basically a checkbox. So we're using the standard function of method in the PuppeteerSharp thing that gives it an ID of that. And then I also tab out. So same thing for the next checkbox, click actually does the work using the ID of the checkbox, ID versus the name, and then tab out of that. Then for the radio buttons, again, selecting by the ID is simple click on that specific ID. If you look at the HTML here, you shall see that here. So, and I had a mistake here where the for, this is a label for this field, and the field name, I changed the field name. See how the name and the field name is different. Payment method is name. And of course, this is by choice because you want they'll all be grouped. The same name will be grouped together. The ID is different, PayPal. And so if there's a mismatch between these two, the whole actually Puppeteer itself was getting confused. So be aware of that as well. If you're using the label for, there has to be an ID with the matching label, that it won't work. So I'm using the IDs for these different types, PayPal, debit card, credit card. And that's what's being sent here. Oh, sorry, here, PayPal, that's the ID. Then I click on the hyperlink here, which is the hyperlink at the bottom of this page that goes to, oh gosh. This one here, at the bottom. So let's go there. And this again is using XPath to find, because I'm doing it by text. So in some cases you have the name of the link you want to, not name, but the text you want to click on, but you're not quite sure what there may be, if there is any identifying information in the A tag. You can't search the A tag by, like in CSS selectors, because they're CSS selectors. You can't say I want an A tag with this text in between the A tag. That's not going to work. You can select an A tag that has specific attributes, which is what I do when I click on these two pages. Sorry. Okay, let me just get past here. I don't want to confuse you. Sorry about that. All right. So the hyperlink text is what the human would see on the page. And this method is going to say, given that text, find the A tag and then sort of navigate or click on that. So that's what this XPath is doing. It's essentially saying find any A tag that contains this value there. This is using XPath, not CSS selectors. And then once we have that, again, it returns an array that could match potentially many values here. And if you're not familiar with XPath and CSS, XPath you can't do in DevTools, but you can do, for example, Let me go back. So then if length is equal to 1, then you can click on it. If it's more than or less than, if it's 0 or more than 1, then that's a problem. When you want to throw an exception in this case. And this is doing this combinatorial thing where I first wait for navigation. In this case, it's going to be clicking an actual hyperlink that is going to navigate the page. So I first wait for the navigation. I have it as a task. Then I do this job, work and the click. But I only exit from here if that navigation has ended. So I'm waiting for the navigation to finish. And it seems a little backwards, like you would think, click and wait for navigation. But the way in Puppeteer, the way navigation or wait for navigation works, so you first sort of wait for navigation. Then you can have n number of tasks, like click and a bunch of other things like that. They're all async. And you can wait on all of them. So one would say that maybe I should be waiting for that as well, of course, because it's conditional. I can't wait on this sometimes. Right? So I've done it like this. But ideally, you want to have a collection of tasks that you want to wait for. If you're doing a wait for navigation, sometimes it causes trouble, right? Not all the time. Maybe it's based on network traffic and a bunch of other things like that. So wait for navigation occurs. You should wait for it first, then do your things and do a when all when you're waiting for all of your navigations to occur. That makes sense. In other words, here you would have n number of tasks, right? So we are waiting for, basically when you click on the hyperlink, we're waiting for that page to load up and then returning from here. So we go back to where we came from here after you clicked on that link, this say generate RESTful CRUD hyperlink, and that's that. That's all we're going. Basically, we click on the page and we get to the page. That's the last thing we do in our whole thing. So let's see this working. I'm sure you guys are all like eager to see how this thing is working. Remember, I've slowed it down a little bit so you can see it happen. All right? All right, here goes. That's happening by itself there. I'm not touching the keyboard or anything. That's it. Pretty fast and ended. What is also done, by the way, at the end of all of this is it took a screenshot, as you can see here, saving in a file called screenshot.jpg. And so it takes a screenshot here. Let me run it again. So I'm going to delete this screenshot so you guys can see it actually happening. This is the local Chromium here. So this folder is where all the Chromium stuff is that it downloads the first time, by the way, just so you know. And that's where all the assemblies are, the binaries for this application. So let's run this again. So you'll have another chance at seeing the whole thing work. Pay attention, it's filling out the form. And drop downs and one more click. And it went pretty fast. And now there's a screenshot.js here. When you open this up, you can see it's taken the, all right, so there it is. This is the whole page, and that's what I asked for. Plus the quality also is 100%. So it's a very nice quality, as good as it can get for JPEGs. And now you can zoom in here. And see the screenshot. If you didn't say a whole page, it of course won't do the whole page. I think do what I was in its view. I just intentionally did the whole page. And so that's the whole page from top all the way to the bottom. There. Okay. That's the page. Right. So now let's look at some of the I'll just go to my blog since there's some stuff I can show you there with regards to CSS selectors and such, just to give you a little brief on that. All right, let me also zoom in properly here. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about some of the CSS selectors. If you haven't used the DevTools, I'm hitting F12 to get the DevTools, and Let me show you what I've got here. You know this thing where I click on in the automation, I click on this number 2 over here. So how do I know how to click on that? As I said, this is not a true, I mean, it could have been a hyperlink, but it's not in this case. Well, it is a hyperlink. It's just a navigate tool on the page here. So how do I find that? There's 2 ways to do that. You can click on this here that inspects, already inspect. And now wherever you click on, it's going to inspect. Or if you don't want to click anywhere, you can keep moving your mouse around like that to inspect. Make sure you're moving the mouse correctly over that. See, for example, that's just on the text. You move it a little bit. Now that's selecting something more and so on. So make sure you're selecting exactly what you're looking for. If it's a hyperlink, you want the hyperlink and not the space around it or whatever. If I click on that, number 2 here, and I click on that, it now goes, it's no longer inspecting, but it's highlighted this thing. You can see it's an A tag. That is a class of type page link, but I'm guessing all the other ones are also page links. So that won't help, as we can't filter on page link if we did. So to do selectors over here, you press Control F once you're in the DevTools, and you'll see the little text box appear over here. There. And if I did something like all A tags where page link, the class is page link. So in that case, when you work with the class, because CSS selectors are mainly for classes, meaning styling CSS, the syntax for that is a.pagelink, and it's called paging link. And it shows you the count here. There's 10 that is selected, and you can navigate through each of those 10. That's because, you know, I've got 10 hyperlinks here. So that's not going to help. I can certainly find it if I wanted to find all these links, but that's what I mean by CSS selectors. But if you wanted to find this specific one or this number 2, you can see that this hyperlink has a data-page number 2 attribute and the value 2. The others have 3, 4, 5, 6. So you can uniquely identify this hyperlink with that if you could somehow filter on that. So the syntax for that would be a open square bracket, then the name of that attribute. So data-page number was very case sensitive. Oops, sorry. Data-page number, and then you can say, you know, equals 2 and close bracket, and you can see now it's picked just one. So that CSS selector uniquely identifies that specific hyperlink without looking for a hyperlink with the text of 2. I could have done that too. You know, it is an A tag, but there's no CSS way to do that hyperlink thing. While we're on this page, we can see here that there's a, let's say this Azure startup tags. Right, so I'm going to inspect that tag. Now you see it here, and you see this href. There's this text here, but there's no other attributes that you can zero in on. You can try the href. So you could do something like, so show me all the A tags where the href equals. Now, of course, that you would need to do the whole thing to equal. We could also do things like, let's say the asterisk equals will say contains, like anything in the middle. So let's say we look for tasks, the tasks, right? So it's showing 4. So there's 4 A tags that have the thing that have the word task in them. I don't know why it messed that up. You can also say starts with. So that will be the hat or caret symbol. Starts with task. Starts means exactly starts. Let me also re-inspect this. I lost the. So if I want to do the hat or the caret here, I would have to say starts with /using, right? /using. So it has to be exactly starting. But similarly, you have for ending, you have the dollar signs, very much like regex, if you're familiar with that. So this has to end with online /. The number of selectors is found 2 here, 1 of 2. There's 2 of those. Right, okay, because there's a hyperlink over here for the same thing. So depending on the HTML, depending on the page, if you're building the page, you can account for some things like this to make your life easier to, you know, help with testing. If you're dealing with somebody else's page, you may not have control over that. So it can get fairly complicated. The aim or the key aspect is the simpler the HTML, the easier it's going to be for automating. If you have control, if it's your page, you can be cognizant of all of these nuances as you learn more and more when you're using Puppeteer, make your lives easier while you're developing so that the testing side becomes easier. Anyway, in Chrome DevTools, you can use, as I said, Control F to get this to this text box here. If you're done with it, you can hit the cancel, it closes, Control F will bring it back up. And you can test out your selectors, if you will, to make sure you're on the right path. So, for example, the code I had here in when I was clicking on that hyperlink page number 2, hyperlink at the back, sorry, at the bottom, I did that. Let me find it here. There. So it's an A tag with the data page number equals 2. And I'm waiting for so basically I'm waiting for the other selector. So when I click on the number 2, it doesn't refresh the page. It's not a navigation, but it kind of repaints the DOM, modifies the DOM. At that point, I'm waiting for that page number 1 to reappear. I know there'll be a page number 1. I don't know how many pages there will be, but there will be a page number 1. So I just wait for that page number 1 tag to be available. So I know I've finished navigation. Right, so there's a wait for selector option in there. So instead of wait for navigation, it's wait for selector. And I give it the selector from the call side. Right, so with Puppeteer, sometimes you have to wait for selectors, sometimes wait for navigation, sometimes wait for JavaScript. There's a bunch of wait for methods. Just you have to be aware of what are you exactly waiting for. Right? Different things, different scenarios might require you to wait for different things. So wait for expression, wait for file chooser, wait for function, wait for navigation, request response, so on and so forth. Very, very powerful capabilities in Puppeteer. You have access to the request that the browser is making, responses that come back, status scores, all of the HTTP stuff. When it's loading, if it's reaching out to load like JavaScript and images and CSS, you can intercept and block if that's what you want, to do, to block certain images and things to load when you're not really concerned with those, when you're automating the testing. So it's a huge amount of features. You can also emulate phones. You can emulate like an iPhone, an Android phone, a Samsung, various versions of it. And that way, in case your website is supposed to work on multiple kinds of devices, kinds of screen sizes, all that can all be automated and tested by simply changing viewports and emulations in Puppeteer or Node.js, the actual Puppeteer, PuppeteerSharp or Puppeteer, the Node.js version. Either ways, they both can do that. So I hope this introduction has been an eye-opener, useful. Maybe you're getting excited about trying to automate some of the stuff yourselves for your own UI, or maybe you fill out a bunch of forms. Often you want to just automate that. How about your timesheet or something, right? Yeah, that's a cool idea, actually. I should do that because for most times it's almost the same, right? There's nothing untoward that happens. Maybe you can make it smart, depending on whether there was a national holiday or something. You could make it be smarter. Good idea. I think I'm going to get cracking on that. All right. So I hope you've learned a few things. I certainly enjoyed demonstrating this feature, Puppeteer, to you. If you've learned a few things and enjoyed yourself, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. Please hit the notify button. The link to the source code to the code you just saw will be in the show notes below. The link will also contain the HTML page that kind of drives this whole thing. So you'll see the Visual Studio code as well as the HTML page. You might have to change the path to kind of reflect that, but I could change it myself before I upload it. Nonetheless, there'll be code that can help you get up and running in no time flat. So please check it out, try it out, let me know how it goes, and let me know what you think. And I'll see you next time.